Hello, I'm Joseph Merz, and I'm the director of the Merz Institute. I want to start by asking you a question. Why are you at COP? I'd argue that whether you know it or not, you're here to ultimately change human behavior. I was the lead author on an influential paper entitled World Scientists Warning: The Behavioral Crisis Driving Ecological Overshoot. I wrote this paper with a number of my colleagues, including renowned evolutionary behavioral ecologist Phoebe Barnard and Bill Rees, the father of the ecological footprint. The purpose of the paper was to name and frame a human behavioral crisis that's driving ecological overshoot and its myriad symptoms like climate change. We believe this framing is vital as it allows us to anchor at that critical point I just mentioned where humans physically interface with the ecosphere. And from there, we can explore upstream the multitude of systemic and evolutionary influences and drivers of our behavior. Some of the most powerful drivers of our behavior are our evolutionary impulses. Humans have a range of these impulses, but it's those predominantly associated with males that have become ubiquitous. And I'm talking about our impulses to acquire, amass, and defend our resources, to defend our territories, and to signal things about ourselves like status and dominance. These impulses used to be adaptive earlier in our evolution, but the scale of the human enterprise and how we contextualize these impulses has made them highly maladaptive. A great example of how we contextualize them is how we currently signal status, which is through the accumulation of hugely resource-intensive artifacts like big houses and shiny cars and boats and planes. In saying that, it's important to highlight the incredible amount of diversity in how these evolutionary impulses were contextualized across cultures and across time. There are also fundamental evolutionary processes at play, and these processes are at play in my life just as much as they're at play in yours. Evolutionary processes don't just shape our biology, but they also shape our culture, our institutions, our laws, and yes, they shape our behavior. Biological selection is a reasonably well-known phenomenon, but there are two other levels of selection that I'm going to talk to you about today. And these are behavioral selection and cultural selection. Behavioral selection occurs at the individual level, and it essentially means you and I behave according to the consequences or the outcome of that behavior. If a behavior has a positive outcome, it's called reinforcing, and it's likely to be repeated. If a behavior has a negative or no discernible outcome, then it's unlikely to be repeated. Cultural selection, on the other hand, can be thought of as a sort of aggregate of what I've just described at the individual level. But behaviors can be both positive and negative in consequences. And this is where another crucial piece of the behavioral puzzle comes in. Humans focus on the more immediate consequences and pay less attention to the ones that are further away. This is called discounting, and humans do it socially, spatially, and temporally. That is to say, we discount consequences, whether they're negative or positive, if they are far away in time, in space, or in our social circles. So what can we take away from all of this? The first takeaway is that we believe if we want to create large-scale social change, we need to prioritize a better understanding and exploration of the behavioral crisis. Not just the facets that I've touched on in this talk, but also the multitude of others. The second is that we believe we need to work to shape the information environment. And a wonderful way of doing this is through storytelling. Storytelling is essentially how humans make sense of information. And shaping the information environment isn't anywhere near as nefarious as it sounds. It's really just about ensuring that the information environment reflects biophysical limits. We're working to do this through our new Centre for Societal Limits, which is supporting industries that are heavily involved in the information environment, like the entertainment industry, to implement guardrails that reflect those biophysical limits. We could be modeling and contextualizing success and status in significantly different ways. Our current contextualization is just one. It's one unguided way of doing this. There are organizations like the Population Media Center that have been shaping the information environment through storytelling for years with great success, even though they don't explicitly call it the information environment. Population Media Center uses Albert Bandura's social learning theory to model behaviors and norms through culturally specific stories. They use a positive role model, a negative role model, and a transitional character, and they depict consequences occurring to these characters. The stories are around 80% entertainment and 20% education, although you wouldn't know that there was any education in it at all. And they have used them to drive behavior change successfully on topics as diverse as gorilla conservation to female genital mutilation. This leads to our third takeaway, which is that we need to start shaping consequences. At its core, our behavior is selected by consequences, and so we need to pay attention to the consequences of certain behaviors and shape them. And remember that human tendency toward temporal, spatial, and social discounting? Well, we don't need to wait for natural consequences to play out to shape behavior. A good example is our ability to create social consequences that are immediate, and so they're less likely to be discounted. And this leads me to the fourth takeaway, which is that these evolutionary processes are the true rulers of the world. If we want positive social change to persist, we believe we need to ensure that the information environment and the behaviors and norms we're modeling are actually reinforcing in an evolutionary sense. That is to say, they will help individuals and their groups to be healthier and more resilient in the long term too. This is a huge opportunity when we're dealing with food systems, as the behaviors and the norms modeled would theoretically help communities to meet their nutritional needs and improve their health and the health of the ecosphere. And my final takeaway is more of a word of caution. The things that we've talked about can't be enforced upon communities. It is vital that individuals in these communities are able to interact with the information and process it in a way that works for them and their community. If this is enforced in a top-down sense, it is almost guaranteed to fail. So we believe our job is to guide and support communities by modeling adaptive, reinforcing, ecologically restorative behaviors and norms that will enable people to satisfy not only their needs, but also their evolutionary impulses at a community level. Thank you for listening to me today.